fair amount of news there. You saw him at the end there criticizing the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, calling him a fool. We should note that President Trump himself appointed him during his first term. There was other news in his comments. The Israeli prime minister announced that Israel has awarded President Trump the Israel Prize, Trump becoming the first American to be given that honor. Also news on the Gaza peace deal, President Trump saying that he believes Israel has lived up to its side of the plan. There had been some reporting that Trump had expressed reservations about Israeli military action inside Gaza. President Trump also vowed to eradicate Iran's nuclear infrastructure if it were to attempt to restart. And the president said multiple times he's hearing of some possible activity, some possible nuclear activity. Finally, he did say regarding Taiwan that he does not believe President Xi Jinping intends to invade. He says, I don't believe President Xi, is going to do it. Our Elena Treen has been monitoring these comments here, covers the White House as well. Elena, do we know what the focus of President Trump's meeting with the Israeli prime minister was?
Well, from my conversations, Jim, and we're still, of course, learning more as it's all unfolding, and the president weaved a lot during those post-bilateral meeting remarks. But the focus was supposed to be on trying to move to the next phase of the ceasefire proposal. I'd remind you that proposal initially began in October. That's when it was struck. And at this point in time, heading very close into the new year, officials in the Trump administration had believed that phase 2 would already be underway. That is, of course, the disarmament of Hamas, the beginning of reconstruction in the enclave, and post-war governance for Gaza. Now, this is something I found very interesting that the president talked a lot about. Heading into that meeting, the president said that he was hopeful that they could begin phase 2 very quickly, including the reconstruction of Gaza. And then after this meeting, he said essentially that he is going to give Hamas, or that Hamas would have a very short amount of time to disarm. Again, that is a key part of phase 2. And he said if they did not disarm within that short amount of time that he is stating on that stage, that essentially things would be horrible for Hamas. He said that some of the other countries that went into this agreement and backed this agreement would go in and wipe them out. So very strong words for Hamas there. Another thing that was very notable to me, Jim, was how much praise, not only, of course, Netanyahu was heaping on President Trump, but the amount of praise that Trump was giving to Bibi. At one point, he said that Israel has lived up to the plan, referring to the ceasefire plan, 100%. That is notable because in a lot of the conversations I've had with people in the administration, many of the advisors working on this deal, there's been some skepticism that perhaps Netanyahu has actually been slow walking phase 2 of this proposal, that essentially he wasn't entirely invested in the longer term peace plan. So that was very notable to me. He said that Israel essentially may not exist if they did not have such a strong prime minister like Netanyahu. Part of the reason that's such music to his ears, to Netanyahu's ears, of course, is that he has elections coming up in 2026. And so part of the goal for the Israelis, and for Netanyahu specifically today, was to really ensure that he has the full backing of Trump. And Trump got out there and did exactly what he wanted him to do, which was give him that type of support and praise.
Yeah, and one example of that is Trump's support for a pardon for Benjamin Netanyahu, potentially being considered by the Israeli president. Elena Treen, thanks so much. My panel is here with me, Evelyn Farkas, former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. CNN political analyst Jonah Goldberg, co-founder and editor-in-chief of The Dispatch, plus Megan Hayes, former director of message planning for the Biden White House, and Brian Lanza, former senior advisor to Donald Trump's 2024 campaign. Good to have you all here, and there's much to go through from those few minutes that the president was speaking alongside the Israeli leader. Evelyn, first to you. The president said multiple times we have peace in the Middle East. He said that before. What we have, in fact, is a ceasefire. Where does it stand in terms of moving to the next phase, arguably the more difficult phase of the peace plan, including issues like disarming Hamas?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, Jim, they have to set up this peace council, which is kind of the political oversight. And we haven't really heard very much about that. Remember, President Trump said, I'm going to be the head of it. And we know that his advisors, so Witkoff and Kushner, have been in the region, have been talking about it. Presumably, it includes all the actors in the region. And the broader region, Turkey, obviously Egypt and others. But the big sticking point is that we still don't have an interim security force. Yes, Ambassador Mike Waltz has been effective in the UN. He got them to essentially authorize this security force. But we don't have countries and significant countries with real military experience coming forward to say, we want to be part of this. We've heard about Azerbaijan, Indonesia, Egypt, a couple of other countries. But I think unless Israel and the United States are pushing, the Arab community to say we need real security forces, that's not going to happen. So there is some kind of foot dragging on top of what Israel's doing on the ground.
It's an enormous risk to put your forces on the ground there in the midst of fighting in Gaza, attempt to disarm Hamas, and perhaps quite understandably, a lot of nations in the area, and by the way, the U.S. as well, but not unwilling to do so. Brian, on the Iran topic, if I can, because the president made quite clear that if what he's hearing is notable, perhaps it was an intelligence assessment about attempts at Iran resurrecting its nuclear program. The president said, if they are, we're going to have no choice but to eradicate. Can we take the president at his word there that he might order strikes again if it does turn out to be true?
So I think it's pretty clear we have to take the president's word. He's not afraid to challenge Iran. He's confronted him in his first term. He's confronted him in his second term. He clearly sees them as an axis of destabilization in the region, and he has to address it. And he what makes him different, at least the interactions that I've had with other presidents, whether it's for good or bad, is the fact that he is this business guy. And business guys in the business community, they always run towards problems and they try to solve it. Whereas you got politicians, they're always looking to kick cans down the road and push on to somebody else. He actually wants to solve this issue. You saw the investment in the first term. You're going to see it again. You're going to see more of it. And it's a risk. It's a huge risk. But he's clear that he is not going to allow a nuclear Iran.
Jonah, I mean, the circumstances of the strikes he ordered a number of months ago were quite particular in that Israel had already essentially eliminated all of Iran's air defenses. So while that was a complicated, and let's acknowledge the service of the American service members who were involved in that operation, it was not the same as going in there and being, in effect, the first to strike. If the president were to order this again, would the circumstances be similar, or would this be a higher risk operation?
I can't imagine. I would be hard pressed to imagine that it would just be like a light switch, and they would just turn. Okay, tomorrow we're going to go attack Iran. It would probably be unfolded, with cooperation with the Israelis and other people in the region. I have a slightly different take on Trump, the problem solver who runs towards fixing problems. I mean, it's been 11 years of 2 weeks for the Obamacare fix from Donald Trump. I think that the likelihood of him doing the Iran strike, which I supported, it was the right thing to do, I'm glad he did it, is that it was also probably the high watermark of his presidency in a lot of people's eyes. And he likes to double down on previous wins if he thinks he can do it again. And I think that it's in his own perceived political self-interest to make sure that this was not for naught. And so that's why I think he'd do it. But the actual circumstances, I think you probably have a lot of coordination. It's not like Bibi Netanyahu was going to say, no, don't go in again, right? So it would have to be developed.
But Megan Hayes, there was some reporting prior to this meeting today that actually Trump was not that excited about meeting the Israeli prime minister. And there has, to Elena's point, there's been CNN reporting and others that the Trump administration and Trump himself were frustrated by foot dragging by Netanyahu on the next phases of the peace plan. Well, what is the actual state of the relationship between the two men, despite the goodwill? And by the way, the second, I think, non-Nobel Peace Prize award that the president has now received after FIFA, he has the Israel Prize from the prime minister.
Yeah, just based off some of the reporting, I think that Bibi had one mission here, and that was to get Trump on his side and for him to say things nice about him publicly, as you mentioned, for his upcoming election. There was reporting that Netanyahu is not super happy with Jared Kushner and Witkoff and how the negotiations are going. So he wanted to meet with Trump, and he wanted to get his input, and he wanted to change his mind on how he is dragging his feet, or at least plead his case to him. So we'll see if it works. What he says publicly is not always what he does in theory or in action in reality. So I think that we'll just have to wait and see how this all plays out.